Hey everybody, Starfish Sicko aka Daniel here, and today I'll be doing a quick prediction for the post-Kickstarter Death Battle debut, Bardock vs. Omni-Man. Emphasis on quick because the episode sort of snuck up on me. But because I backed the Kickstarter, I did want to talk about some of these episodes, at least the ones that I'm really interested in. But that doesn't mean this will be my channel's main focus. Even though I started this channel because I was excited about a death battle, I am still more or less content to do my own thing, mostly talking about my own versus matchups and especially Superman comics. And if you stay tuned to the end of the video, I'll tell you some of that content that is coming up soon. First, a few preliminary notes. One, this is being made with what I can recall about both characters. It is not deeply researched, aside from checking a couple of numbers using Google to confirm a few things. Two, my prediction will mostly be based on who I think Death Battle will be giving the W to, and not who I think should win. And three, this is being made with the assumption that both characters are soft composites, with Bardock getting his movies and maybe some of the manga, and Omni-Man getting the comic and the cartoon, which makes sense because if we include a full composite, that means Xeno Bardock would be on the table and he would sneeze away the verse. I'd also like to get a couple of my biases out of the way. When I was growing up, I wasn't that big of a comic book fan outside of the X-Men and a couple of Marvel books here and there. My real obsessions were Dragon Ball Z and Final Fantasy. And one of the things I really loved were the direct-to-video Dragon Ball Z movies that we got, and I especially loved the Bardock movie. It was one of my favorites, and he is still one of my favorite characters. And when it comes to Omni-Man, I enjoy Invincible, but I'm sure everyone that's frequent to my channel knows I sort of am sick of the quote-unquote evil Superman trope. So he just doesn't excite me or hit the same nostalgia bubbles in the same way. So without that all out of the way, it's good. Let's get started. Overall, I feel pretty confident that Death Battle is going to break down the advantages of each character like this. Bardock is going to take attack potency, range, and some precognition, while Omni-Man takes speed, experience, endurance, and they're going to talk about his slight healing advantage. It's looking like it's going to be a tank versus a speed blitz matchup. So who's going to take it? Well, that really just depends on what numbers Death Battle finds to be more important. But I think I know. First, the numbers. It's important we know, or at least can guess, the numbers that we think they will use. So I don't really like using power levels for Dragon Ball when it comes to versus discussions, especially because they don't always scale in a linear fashion. Sometimes as little as having 2,000 over a person would create a significant advantage, and other times it just doesn't mean anything. I far prefer using feats when available, but sometimes there just isn't a lot of them, especially when it comes to speed feats. Outside of filler, I don't have a lot of good ones, so I will be defaulting to given power levels to illustrate some possible gaps in this video. Depending on what source you use or who you ask, get ready to hear that a lot, Bardock had a power level of around 10,000, at least the version of him from the specials. His canon version from Super has apparently been compared to the Ginyu Force, which could put his power level of around 120,000, but I'm not really sure if Death Battle's going to go in that direction. I'll get more into that in a little bit. Well, what about Zenkais, I hear you ask? Well, I've always found them to be a little inconsistent, but for argument's sake, let's say it doubles and Bardock goes from having a power level of about 10,000 to 20,000 between specials. Try to remember this is just for argument's sake. I don't really have an argument for this. Just stay with me for a minute. So how fast should he be? Pinning down speed in Dragon Ball has always been sort of a pain. Just like comic books, it can be really inconsistent from chapter to chapter. People either really love the numbers they get, or they call it downplay or wank, depending on who the argument's coming from. And it doesn't help that the numbers can fluctuate pretty highly. Some calced feats put characters in Dragon Ball Z from the relativistic end of speed to just past faster than light, with some of the higher ends I've seen being between 1 6,500 times the speed of light to 17,000 times the speed of light, but I'm not going to really get into that. Instead, I'm going to wank Bardock as much as possible for argument's sake. In the Dragon Ball days, Goku was able to dodge Tien Shion's solar flare with a power level of 180. And we are going to be using this as a baseline light speed feat. This nonsense will assume linear progression, but let's just play with it for a little bit. With a power level of 10,000, that puts Bardock at 55.5 times the speed of light. Once he goes Great Ape, that's a 10 times power boost, and that'll give you 555.5 times the speed of light. And while we don't have official confirmation, I'm pretty positive we will be getting Super Saiyan for this fight. So I'm going to take our previous number and multiply it by the Super Saiyan's 50 times multiplier. And yes, before anyone mentions it, I know that Great Ape usually doesn't stack on top of Super Saiyan, but you're going to see why I'm doing this in a minute. That gives us a speed of 27,775 times the speed of light, baby. Oh, and don't think I forgot about that Zenkai boost. Let's multiply that previous number by 2 and get a master total of 55,555 times the speed of light. Now, it really does feel like I wanked those numbers. At least I feel like I did. Who knows? Maybe these will be close to the margin. Maybe these will be an underestimation. Maybe there'll be a little bit of an overestimation. But it is a little bit higher than I normally rank Z characters in this category. The issue here is, even with wanking and calc stacking and assuming the numbers could be a little bit higher, Omni-Man has speed feats ranging from millions of times the speed of light to billions of times the speed of light. The lower ends would make him 25 times faster than the numbers I came up with, while the higher ends would make him 36,000 times higher than the numbers I came up with. Granted, I did pull those numbers right out of my ass. And that's ignoring that they could realistically rank Bardock's speed way lower into the relativistic to just past FTL ranges. That's a pretty big gap. But, well, what about the attack potency? Let's talk about that. That'll put Master Roshi at moon level, so how much more would be needed to destroy a planet? Please remember, I'm not a scientist and Google didn't make this easy. I came back with numbers ranging from 81 times to 100 times to 1800 times more energy needed to destroy the Earth compared to the moon. That would mean a power level estimation could range anywhere from 8,000 to well over 150,000. Now's a good time to remind people that power levels also don't always scale linearly, and that's why I prefer to use feats, statements, and other methods. Luckily, we have statements and guidebooks to back us up. Here, Vegeta said he could destroy the Earth with a power level of 18,000. And this guidebook says it only takes a power level of 10,000 minimum to destroy a planet. Between a minimum power level of 10,000 probable Zenkai boost and possibly them using higher end estimations, I think it's safe to say that Death Battle is going to make Bardock casually planet level. Well, what about Omni-Man? 3 Viltrumites destroying a planet is by far the most used feat for the verse, and while I'm aware of some higher end estimations by Invincible fans, some higher end scaling that some people throw around, I tend to fall back on this one as more consistent, and I also think Death Battle is going to as well. This feat is often calced to be around moon level to small planet level. And that means Omni-Man's either going to be starting off fighting relatively equal, probably someone that's a little bit stronger, to fighting someone who's possibly 1,800 times stronger from the get-go. The Great Ape is a 10 times power boost by itself, and the Super Saiyan I suspect to happen is 50. This means Omni-Man could be fighting someone between 18,000 to 90,000 times stronger. This isn't just one-shot territory, this is killing Omni-Man and the entire Viltrumite empire that's standing behind him. Honestly, remembering a match that's broken down this way is sort of hard. You have one person with such a massive speed advantage versus another one with just a massive destructive capacity advantage. But saying it's too close to call is boring. With all of this said, here's my official prediction. Omni-Man. I know. Just hear me out for a second. Remember, this is not an official analysis. It's a prediction. If you want my honest opinion, Bardock charging up in his base form could very well create shockwaves that break every bone in Nolan's body. And Nolan's fighting style typically involves him charging in and just punching people right in the schnoz. And if he thinks a Saiyan can't hurt him because he doesn't know what one is, then that also leaves him open to being one shot, and his healing factor just isn't going to matter when the numbers are this big. This isn't my take on the matchup, it's a prediction, and there are a few things that make me think Death Battle is going to swing this way. And no, it has nothing to do with them hating Dragon Ball or trying to stir up controversy for clicks. Both of these characters have big and passionate fan bases, so I just don't buy that. What I think is going to come down to is a few of these numbers. Primarily, it's going to be speed. Where people rank Dragon Ball Z speed can vary pretty wildly. I had to make a lot of assumptions and calc stack to get the numbers as close as I did, and I don't think they're likely to. And then you combine that with experience. Death Battle has often shown a preference for these two stats, usually coming up with a conclusion that something like they're too fast to hit, plus their experience lets them know how to use their speed. And Nolan has 2,000 years worth of experience on Bardock. Lastly, let's talk about endurance. Time and time again, Death Battle talks about Ki being a finite pool of energy, and I think they are going to compare it to Nolan being able to hold his breath for 7 days with no issue. Sure, Bardock could nuke the planet they're fighting on, but Nolan could just as easily fly away. And then they can fall back on the Saiyans can't breathe in space argument, even if I find that to be a little dubious, especially when we're talking about composites, soft or otherwise. Sure, Bardock can see the future, but its advantages are minimal. In the movie, it almost always was a hindrance, and I very much expect Death Battle to use it as sort of a red herring during the fight. And this is all of us still just assuming they are going to use the more accepted or lower ends for Omni-Man's attack potency. But the show has surprised me by bringing in things that other people probably would have discarded. Let's just call this one a gut feeling. Regardless, I find this to be an extremely fun matchup, especially because it's so rare that you get a disparity in the way the stats break down like they do here. If I had to rate the confidence in my prediction, it would be a 55-45 split in Omni-Man's favor. So if they have Nolan rush in and get gut punched, I won't be too surprised, and I'll get to cheer. These are just my thoughts. Who are you rooting for? Who do you think's going to win? Who do you think should win? Why don't you go ahead and comment below and let's have a friendly discussion. If there's any interest, I'll review some of these Death Battle episodes as they drop, at least the ones I'm interested in. Other than that, I'm going to stick to more of my original versus content. And let's not forget about all of the Superman content I'm getting ready to put out. Coming soon will be Superman's Just Hands episode where I talk about his martial arts prowess. And talk about how well I think he would do against some other fighters. Who are those fighters? You're just going to have to tune in to find out. One of my first Superman videos was whether or not I thought he could lift infinity. And while those numbers are impressive, pretty soon you're going to see why they just don't matter when we scale him beyond that. Lastly, did you know there's a brand new version of Superman that DC is getting ready to put out? Absolute Superman? I thought it would be fun if I reviewed these comics as I got them. Of course, it's never going to be on release day because, well, I can never do things on time. But I thought it would be fun to review the art, the story, and to power scale this new Superman as we go on his adventures with him, just to see how he stacks up to my Big Blue. With most of my videos, this has gone on far longer than I intended. This has been Daniel with Truth, Justice, and all of that nonsense. I'll catch you next time.